Founded in 2014, the Extraordinary Achievers' vision is to empower others to be the best version of themselves. The show is hosted by Chief Lady Waynette Peters, a multi-entrepreneur, empowerment speaker, confidence mentor, positive lifestyle coach, humanitarian ambassador, and a TV host. Lady Waynette is a holder of over 35 international awards for her humanitarian, philanthropic, and international empowerment contributions and holds 2 chieftaincy titles. Welcome to the Extraordinary Achievers Show.
As we explore riots and demonstrations versus petitions and/or lobbying. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for tuning in, for all the shares, and for your continued support. I'd like to thank the Extraordinary Achievers admin and technical team that greatly assist me. As we settle in, and whilst we're sharing this via YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook to others so they can join us, we are going to listen to a song by Anthony Everest called You Call Me Baby.
Oh, why don't you call me? When will you call me? Why don't you call me? I'm your only love. Hey, come now, free me. Hey, won't you lead me? Hey, I need you, free from life, strife, and pain. Baby, 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 baby. Baby, baby, baby.
Thank you. That was Anthony Everest with Call Me. We would like to welcome some of our guests that are watching us now. And as we welcome you, Sophia, good evening to you. Samuel C. Brown, good evening to you too. And Bangi, it's good to be back. Good evening, and good evening to you too. Dr. Vita, looking forward to this show, and thank you for tuning in from Dallas, Texas. Vicky, we thank you for joining us, and thank you for being an amazing team member for the Extraordinary Achievers. Angela, thank you for sharing, and thank you for your support. And Kelsey would like to thank you for your support in administration as part of the team. Thank you so much for joining us. And Angie, hello to you. We would like to welcome you from YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Meetup, wherever you're watching us from. We welcome you and we thank you for joining us today. Today, we are joined by Councillor Sunny Lambe, the Labour and Cooperative Councillor for South Bermondsey Ward. We are also joined by Cath, Convery, a former armed forces major and now a change specialist. She's an active member of Wantage and Didcot Conservative Association. We also have the pleasure of welcoming onto the Extraordinary Achievers Show the former Mayor, Councillor Sanchia Alasia, Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at London South Bank University. We welcome you and we thank you for joining us today. We are going to go straight to Councillor Sunny Lambe, and welcome, Councillor Sunny.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. We thank you for joining us. Councillor Sunny Lambe, the Labour and Cooperative Councillor for South Bermondsey Ward, a community leader and business management consultant for over 3 decades. Councillor Sunny, you join us today and we celebrate that you've had numerous number of youth and community development and empowerment initiatives with experience covering public, private and voluntary sectors. Councillor Sunny is very passionate about equality, fairness and social justice for all humanity. Councillor Sani Lambe has been a recipient of multi achievements, many recognitions awards for his contribution to community cohesion and development. And today we say welcome onto the Extraordinary Achievers Show.
Thank you.
Councillor Samni, we're going to ask you the very first question. How effective is rioting and demonstrations versus petitions and lobbying for change?
Thank you very much. I think it's quite a very interesting question. Um, I think riot is a means to an end. Riot alone does not achieve anything. And take, for instance, we go back to South Africa, for instance, some decades ago, before during the time when the country was going through when they had the apartheid regime. There was a lot of demonstration, a lot of rioting, but at the end of the day, the ANC, who were coordinating all that at that point, they had to come around the table. However, rioting and demonstration helps to highlight, helps to publicize the issues in question, the indifference of the government in question. You see what happened last year when in Lord um, George Floyd in America, where the due the act of that police officer who was kneeling on his neck for over 9 minutes. There was a lot of demonstration through the Black Lives Matter globally. Yes, that highlighted the issue. But at the end of the day, we saw what happened yesterday. It still has to go through the legal system. And we are all happy that at the end of the day, the family got the justice they require. So therefore, yes, when there's injustice, riot is part of the tools you can use to highlight the injustice, to draw the attention of the whole world, the government, all the stakeholders into the injustice going on. However, at the end of the day, we still have to sit around the table to talk. Of course, where is important is we have the international community, we have the various stakeholders around the world supporting and putting pressure on the oppressor. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Councillor, in a nutshell, are you saying that rioting and demonstrations are required, are better than petitions or lobbying for change?
I would say rioting is the extreme end because I think in some cases when people start rioting, it's probably because their petition fails. Subtle approach fails. And this is where policymakers need to listen. If you go back to what happened was it last year in Nigeria, for instance, when we had the NSAS demonstration, for instance, they drew attention to the atrocities being committed by the law enforcement agencies in Nigeria. And unfortunately, the government was indifferent. So what do we expect? And this is the lesson for all of us policymakers, government at any level, in any part of the world, that people need to be listened to. I think when we fail to listen, that is when people take the law into their own hands. That is when they demonstrate. That is when peaceful demonstration turns into riot. Of course, if subtle approaches, for example, like writing petitions, and we listen as policymakers, if we listen, and even we have to draw a timeline by which those issues brought to our attention will be implemented. Obviously, it may take long, people will listen, we carry them along with us. But it's only when policymakers, when governments fail, then people take the law into their own. So I won't blame people who demonstrate. However, I will appeal to those who think rioting is the answer. I mean, we look at what happened in 2011, for instance, the London riot, and the amount of damage, destruction, properties, and so on. So when we look at that, then the question is, how much has changed in 2011?
Mm-hmm.
How much has changed? Then we need to ask ourselves that. Even when you go back to, some years ago, in China, for instance, in 1989, the Tiananmen Square, protests and a massacre that happened. We can also see what is going on here recently. So all this issue is what policymakers, governments at local, national, and international level need to look at and consider when they are making policy decisions.
Thank
I hope
you.
that answers your question.
It's for the viewers to decide today. Viewers will, the viewers will decide if you've answered that question today, but we thank you for that input. We will be back with you shortly as we are now going to introduce the former Mayor, Councillor Sanchia Alasia, who joins us today on the Extraordinary Achievers. Councillor Sanchia, we thank you for joining us today. Good evening.
Good evening, and it's a pleasure to be on the Extraordinary Achievers show.
Thank you. Councillor is a former mayor, is an award-winning specialist in diversity, human resources, and EU affairs, as well as a motivational speaker. She currently works at London South Bank University as the head of equality, diversity, and inclusion. She's an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Personal Development and a fellow of the Chartered Management Institute. Councillor Sanchia was first elected to Barking and Dagenham Council in 2010 and was the first of 3 Black women to be elected there. She was held a number of positions: school governor, chair of the Health and Adult Services Scrutiny Committee, and the chair of the Planning Committee. Former Mayor Councillor Sanchia Alasia was the first Caribbean female civic mayor there in 2018 to 2019. Councillor Sanchia has won numerous awards, including Outstanding Public Sector Personality of the Year at the Precious Awards in 2020. Highly commended the Baton Award figure in 2020 and the Award for Excellence in the Public Sector at the Gathering of Africa's Best Awards in 2020. She was also named as one of the 50 most inspirational Black women in the UK and the Black History Month in 2019 by African Glitz magazine. The former mayor, Councillor Sanchia, took part in the Operation Black Vote MP as she in shadow scheme in 2006, that's 2006, as she shadowed Sadiq Khan and subsequently Diane Abbott. And today, Councillor Sanchia, we welcome you on the Extraordinary Achievers show.
No, it's a pleasure to be here. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Councillor, we are going to go to that very same first question. How effective is rioting and demonstrations versus petitions and lobbying for change?
Well, again, it is an interesting question, and I think Councillor Sana Lambe did outline that. I think there's different uses for different things. So first of all, it's important to highlight that under Article 11 of the Human Rights Act, we do have the right to protest. We have the right to come together with others and peacefully express our views, and that has to be allowed. If we're coming together to gather for a common purpose and protest peacefully, then we're able to do that. And the Article 11 allows us that freedom of expression. What the Article 11 doesn't allow for, though, is intentionally violent protest. And what we sometimes see is peaceful marches, and then towards the end of those peaceful marches, they can sometimes end up in riots because of a small amount of people. But we shouldn't let, maybe a small group of people that maybe do rioting at the end of a peaceful protest derail the whole message and meaning of why the gathering or why the demonstration was going ahead in the first place. Petitions can also be very useful too, though. And I don't know if people are aware, but petitions do have power. So if I take it at the central government level as a start, if you have a petition that gets 10,000 signatures, the government will give you a formal written response. And some of the petitions that have come forward in the last couple of months that have got a formal government response is, for example, allowing international travel to visit partners and family. If your petition gets 100,000 signatures, it's actually debated in Parliament. And what we see, what we have seen is that there was a debate just on Monday about improving the maternal mortality rates in healthcare for Black women, which was debated on Monday because it got 100,000 signatures. At the local council level, where I am based, you can also have a petition dealt with. So if you, at your local council level, so for me in Barking and Dagenham or sunny Lambe in Sadok, if you can get a petition that will reach 1,500 signatures, then we will debate that matter in the public council meeting. So what we have seen there, what I'm trying to outline, is that there is power in petitioning, in lobbying, in protesting. I think peaceful protest is the way. We saw Martin Luther King lead that example. Sometimes things do turn around at the end of the day, but we need to not let that, as I say, derail the whole matter of the protest in the first place. There's also lobbying, and all of us can be involved in that. You can lobby people like myself, your elected councillors, you can lobby your members of parliament on any issue that you feel is important to you, and they will also usually provide you with a written response. We've also seen where lobbying can sometimes go wrong. So we've seen in the news over the last week where David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, personally lobbied the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, on behalf of a company he was working for, Green Seals. And we've seen there where there's been a lot of talk and commentary about whether that was appropriate. But in the main, you do have the right to write to your MP, your local councillors, about any issue that you feel is important to you. And most of the time they will look into those issues and try to find a resolution, or at the very least try to find an answer. So I hope that I've outlined the various ways in which we as citizens can get more civically and politically engaged with the various options open to us. So thank you once again for the question.
Thank you for that response, and how very thorough the response was. As short as it was, it covered so much. We have some comments that we have, and we're going to bring them up on the screen. Joanne says, I'm so glad to see you, my darling sister Sanchia, on the show. Amazing woman of substance. We thank you for that comment. And Anne-Marie says, excellent point, Sanchia. About now, not allow few rioters, spoilers, to prevent peaceful use
Absolutely.
of rights. And we agree with you, and we thank you for that. Thank you, Councillor Sanchia. We will
Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you've just joined us to the Extraordinary Achievers Show, we welcome you today from YouTube, from Facebook, from Twitter, from LinkedIn, from wherever you are joining us from. We appreciate you, and we would appreciate it if you also share with others so that they can join in the discussion. If you have any questions, any comments for our panel today, please do add it onto the comment boxes and we will surely read it out to them. We are now going to welcome Cath Convery. Cath, welcome onto the Extraordinary Achievers.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Cath Convery served for 18 years in the armed forces, reaching the rank of major. During this period, she was not involved in politics. On her retirement from the army, Cath set up a family-owned training business that works across a plethora of subject areas, including project change and contract management. Cath routinely works with both the public and the private sector in UK and abroad. Within the last 5 years, she has worked in both United Arab Emirates and in London routinely. Since the start of the pandemic, Cath has continued to deliver training from her home, moving to a virtual delivery. Alongside her work commitments, Cath is an active member of Wantage and Didcot Conservative Association, and she is standing in the May 6th elections for Didcot Town Council. Cath believes passionately in community work. This last year has been her setup and run the mutual aid group in a local area supporting families and neighbors. Cath believes change is best achieved by influencing both her network and by working with the community to encourage change at that level. Cath Convery, a trainer and a change agent who has been actively involved in local politics for the last 15 years. Cath is the director of a family-owned training business, and we would like to thank you for your time and joining us on the Extraordinary Achievers today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm feeling a tad intimidated by not only the title, but by the rest of the guests. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you.
You're a major. Nothing
I was a major.
Nothing can intimidate you, surely. Cath, how effective is rioting and demonstrations versus petitions and lobbying for change in your expertise and your experience?
Do you know, I think it's a fascinating topic, and I've been watching the comments that are coming in, and I think I'm for once in agreement with the other panelists. I think it is one end of the spectrum. In fact, I'd go further and say that after riot, you have warfare, and I really don't want to be there with regards to discussion and change. And I almost smiled today, and I don't know about the rest of you, when you realised that this session was on this evening, because we've had countless comments in the news over the last 24 to 48 hours concerning petitioning, lobbying and rioting, and in demonstrations. Across the pond in America, we've had the result come in for George Floyd and the tragic murder that has been found to be the case. But equally, large groups of people in America, in fact, I read tonight that a car was driven at a crowd of demonstrators, which is just tragic. I sat and listened to both the president and the vice president talking about the fact that they hope that this event can now be the healing of their nation and a new change. And, you know, as somebody who has studied American politics for many years now, I do reference some of the things that you're talking about in the chat area. You know, Dr. King did say that riots was the voice of the unheard, but equally he believed passionately in protest, silent protest and peaceful protest. We've had reference today Tiananmen Square. I was in the military during Tiananmen Square, and I can remember being terrified that this would be the precursor to a much larger conflict that would involve many nations. And we've seen people decide that they need to take to the streets for a large number of different reasons across the ages, from even what I would class as the peripheral. Last night there were people on the streets in London because a game of football was going to be only run in Europe. and I appreciate people think that that's exceptionally important, but they were still demonstrating. And as has been pointed out, this is one of our rights. We have the right to peacefully demonstrate in most nations of the world, and freedom of speech is indeed one of our other rights. For me, one of the biggest challenges with demonstration and indeed rioting, which was the precursor of the next phase, which would be warfare, the big challenge to this area is that it can alienate people. It can alarm, it can push people away from the cause that you're trying to highlight, and it can damage both public and indeed business. And for many, it can be the turn off for the cause that they're trying to present. It often happens because people are hugely frustrated. It often happens because they feel that they're not being heard. But if I take us down the other side of the spectrum, and we've already had some of this mentioned tonight, we do have the right to lobby. I mean, unfortunately, the term lobbying is being used as something that's quite negative, and we keep referencing members of my party, the Conservative Party, with regards to lobbying, and I would reflect back at that, without wishing to make this political, that both all parties have lobbied in the past, and there are, one could say that that's a negative, one could say that's a positive. We have the right to talk to people. In fact, I suggest that, the reason that I'm on today's show is because somebody reached out and petitioned and said, could anybody help? So that is a form of lobbying. So, we go from one extreme where we're trying to communicate a vision and a change in a peaceful way, right through that spectrum to warfare. And I'd hope that we would never get to the spectrum doesn't tilt over, that we stay in the peaceful area. And for me, that allows us to take the community forward. It allows us to have a common goal and a common vision. It allows us to bridge so that we all move in a common direction together. And a lot of evidence would say we need to communicate, and communicate 7 times more. And I think in doing that, we start to actually move to a common understanding. So I think that is probably my position. Yes, rioting and demonstration has a place, but it's that tipping over that, if I'm really honest, I'm not that keen on.
Thank you. We appreciate your comment, and we are now going to take some comments from the audience. And thank you for all the hellos, good evenings, and acknowledgements that we've been receiving. We would like to say thank you so very much. We're seeing them all there in the comment boxes, and we will address them later if we have a moment. We thank you so much. We're going to look at some comments. Monty says, rioting achieves nothing but just racks up dust. After a while, it settles. No power to change. Monty once again says, nothing has changed since riots and demonstrations have been taking place. Monty goes on to say, lobbying the powerful is the way forward, but who gets access? I'm sure one of our panelists will address your comments, and we thank you for that. Anne-Marie says, institutions and governments should work to avoid the need for peaceful marching, peaceful demonstrations. If people believe that they are being listened to and actions respecting humanity is being taken, they would not do these things. It's an act of desperation when kicking the can down the road fails petitions, or they do not have funds for lobbying. And we thank you for your comment. Patrick says, Dr. King also said, riots are the language of the unheard. One must look at the reasons why they happened. We thank you for your comment. Patrick goes on to say, Dr. King also said, riots are the voice of the unheard. That's not condoning, because he wasn't condoning, but saying people do it because they feel powerless. Monty goes on to say, when you talk about Africa, it's called corruption. Then in Europe, it's lobbying, etc. Only the powerful know the powerful. We thank you for your contribution. And Sharon says, rioting unfortunately gives way to looting. This makes it less effective. We thank you for those comments and we ask you to keep the comments coming. And if you have any questions for our panelists today, please do ask them as many questions as you can. We are now going to go back to Councillor Sani. Councillor Sani, we welcome you back onto our screens with the next question to you. What examples do we have where change has happened because of riots and demonstrations? Or, as you said earlier in your statement, is this merely creating awareness for a need for change? Is there a place really for riots and demonstrations? Have we seen any changes that have really taken place only because of riots and demonstrations?
I mean, I would disagree that rioting alone, makes any difference or makes much difference. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, um, is is it's a means to an end, and only when all everything else fails that people then resort to rioting. Somebody mentioned, for instance, petitions. Yeah, that's probably a very subtle, very peaceful way of doing it. You write to your local MP or your councillor or your prime minister. If it reaches 10,000, they have to debate it at the, at the parliament. But how about if they don't do anything? We wouldn't have had a free South Africa today if, for instance, the ANC didn't incorporate a degree of demonstration, a degree of rioting. Even we saw in the 80s when we had hundreds of people demonstrating at the Trafalgar Square, drawing attention to the injustices. It's only when there is a feeling of injustice that's when people resort to every means at their disposal. And most people, if you ask them, they rather go, stay at home, send a few emails to their local MP or their prime minister, hoping that something will happen. It's only when they've been pushed to the wall. If you go back to the poll tax, for instance, people went on the street and you saw what happened to Mr. Thatcher after that. People went on the street because they believe they're not being listened to. And we then go to 2011, for instance, people went on the street because they felt they're not being listened to. And if you then go to America, for instance, you saw the riots there. Of course, it didn't immediately change anything, but it drew attention. It became a global movement. And we saw what happened yesterday. Perhaps if there had not been demonstration and some degree of rioting, maybe government wouldn't have listened. Maybe the team of lawyers, counsel they put together to argue the government case, which led to the the prosecution of a Chauvin yesterday. Maybe that wouldn't have happened. So therefore, I personally think every tool you use, a tool any of us can use, any movement can use. However, personally, I think rioting, as somebody rightly said, that it's excuse for looting, excuse for destruction. We saw what happened last year when some people were destroying public monuments. I condemn those acts. However, it's only when other peaceful means are not being listened to,
Mhm.
being ignored by the government. That is why people then take the law into their hands. And don't forget, it's only very tiny minority of people that do that. If you look at what happened in Nigeria, for instance, the answers in riots, in demonstration, which then led to riot, the government shooting and army shooting and so on. It because peaceful means. These were people dancing, dancing, playing drums and so on. But unfortunately, sometimes government um they don't want to see that, and they believe, and only when that the government fails to listen to the yearnings of the people, that when people then take the law into their hands. Of course, I don't support it. I don't think I've ever been to any demonstration in my life. Funny enough. But I one of the people that actually use subtle ways of I write petitions. If you probably remember when that happened, we wrote some petition. I asked some people to sign it. We sent it to the prime minister. We got we got a response from the government.
Mhm.
That's my way. However, I can also understand those who believe enough is enough. We had enough. No, our government that we elected are not listening to us. It's just like when a woman, I'm going to use this as an example. When you believe your partner is not listening, this is where it leads to some violence. And then when she then picks a bottle or something one day and knock you on your head, that's when you know, actually, I should have been listened. Maybe
Oh,
not exactly the same, but it's only when people get to a certain point, they realize, I can't have this no more. I can't live like this. I'd rather die than live like this. You can see why people turn to that. So therefore, yes, it's not something we advocate, but we also have to listen, have to understand why people elect to do that. It's not what they will ordinarily an approach you ordinarily adopt. It's because everything else fails. And that's where people go on the street. Of course, there are some elements within those groups who are only there and not using it as an opportunity to to cause havoc. But we have to ignore those ones. There are people, majority of people there, probably even 99.9% of people there are just wanted to let the whole world hear them. And they want change,
thank you.
positive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And viewers at home, Councillor Lambe didn't say anyone should take a bottle and hit anyone. And we just want to make that one quite clear. We go to Councillor Sanchez. Councillor Sanchez, we have a question for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Question will come up on the screen. We have got TJ, and TJ asked the question for Councillor Sanchia, and he asked, let's look at the most popular riots we have had in the UK, especially along racial issues. Can you please tell me how many petitions would have been a tool as opposed to the riots that happened? Do you think petitions would have helped as opposed to the riots? Example, the Brixton and Tottenham riots.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a range of tools that can be used, and some of them may be more appropriate depending on what the issue is. So I think we have petitions, we have lobbying, and we have peaceful protest and demonstration. And depending on what the issue is and the people that you're working with and associating with to formulate your concerns, you will then decide on what method is best for you. So I'm not necessarily advocating one method higher than another or more important than another. I think if I reference a couple of demonstrations and that have happened over the last year, we see the Black Lives Matter protests or demonstrations that followed the murder of George Floyd, and it is actually confirmed as murder with the conviction yesterday, although we always knew that that was the case. We saw that the Black Lives Matter protests created sparks across the whole world, and following that, we see companies, many companies actually taking the issues facing their Black staff and their BME staff much more seriously. Now, we have, as Black staff, been talking about these issues for many years, but the difference is now we feel that they're interested in hearing us, and now that they're actually interested in putting some action in place. Even if you look at the very recent, after the Black Lives Matter process, you look at the recent murder of Sarah Everard by a police officer, we then again saw peaceful protests in Hyde Park, and we had the Duchess of Cambridge actually come along and look at the tributes that were laid there. So I wouldn't say, well, you should only use demonstrations or you should only use peaceful protests. I think there are a range of options that can be used. I personally think it was quite powerful to have that debate on Monday, talking about Black women being 5 times more likely to either die or suffer severe complications during childbirth. I think that issue has been talked about for many, many years, but actually having it debated in Parliament was quite powerful, and I think change will resonate from that. So, you know, in summary, to answer the question, I would say I think there's a range of tools available, and it's for us, you know, leading the charge and leading the issue to decide what tool is going to be most effective in terms of bringing our issue to bear to the authorities. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. And thank you for answering that question, Councillor. And TJ, we thank you for your question. We are now going to welcome back onto our screens Cath. Cath, we have a question for you. Do the panelists believe protests, demonstrations have a role in reminding democratic government that they should be governing for the people, for truth and justice, etc.? For example, without the international BLM protest, would the US judiciary have made the rightful and just decision?
It's quite a difficult question for me to answer because it specifically asks about the Black Lives Matter movement, which I don't feel qualified to answer. I can empathise, but I can't step in the shoes of those that feel that they have a strong message to talk to in this area. But I do believe that they would have come to the right verdict in America, whatever the crowd was saying. I believe that the law courts would have found the answer that they did find, and I think that it would have ended peacefully. Unfortunately, today there's been another shooting in America, so there are tensions in the country. There have been, you know, mass murders and shootings in America for many years, and unfortunately I think that's got much more to do with a lot of other things that are outside the realm of what we're talking about today. I would, if it's okay with you, just like to reflect back to the last question. Tottenham riots, you know, I'm old enough to remember the Tottenham riots, and they were in the mid-80s, and it was a terrible period of time for us in this country, and the tension that was around 35 years ago was very intense. I think that some of the points that are being made in the chat room about the fact that there is a distinction between rioting and demonstrating is absolutely true. And I think it's also true what we've been saying with regards to the fact that it's often just small groups of people who are taking over a quiet and peaceful protest that choose to riot. And we've had mentioned the Bristol riots this evening. We've had mentioned Tottenham and Brixham. We haven't had mentioned the Northern Ireland riots, which are obviously going on at the moment back in Belfast, an area that I know quite well, in Londonderry and Derry. And putting a finger on exactly why those riots are happening is a difficult one, but they have moved way past demonstration to, you know, children throwing petrol bombs and things such as that. So this is about people wishing to be heard. Do I think that it's useful, and do I think it is actually affecting change? No, I think even if you reference South Africa, which we have done this evening, Nelson Mandela himself, although he started with unpeaceful protest, he ended his long period of time in power advocating peaceful protest. And I'm not certain that I would ever say that rioting is particularly effective. I'm picking up on Patrick's point here. He says in the past the law has not found the police officers who did extrajudicial killings guilty. And I think that there are problems. I mean, you know, if it's gone to court, and we'll have another court case in America in the near future with the police lady who also fired her police pistol into a car, and unfortunately somebody was killed. So I'm sure there will be another case soon. is it going to make any difference if the people come out that there is a guilty or not guilty claim at the end of that trial? I'm sure there will be a trial. I'm not sure there will be. I think that the law courts will make a decision on that one as well. So, Patrick, I think it's a very difficult question you're asking. I'm not sure that the demonstration, that the riot makes a difference. I think that peace demonstration and the right to speak is one of our fundamental rights in a democracy.
Cath, we thank you for answering that question. We are now going to address some of those comments as they have been coming in. We have a comment from Sharon, and Sharon says, rioting unfortunately gives way to looting. This makes it less effective. And we have our next comment from Patrick. The verdict of the guilty for Derek Chauvin would not have happened if it weren't for public pressure from demonstrations last year. Patrick goes on to say, a really good discussion, and thank you, Patrick, for your participation. And Nick says, excellent debate, and we welcome you back on the show. Patrick T says, great points, Councillor Sunny. Angela says, choose tools to behead wisely. Anne-Marie says, remember, you cannot effectively demonstrate on your own. So when so many people are affected, the masses, they cannot keep silent. By demonstrating, they force politicians back into alignment to do better for the good of the masses. This demonstrates that the majority of people are decent and want decency for those elected to run the country. And we thank you for your input. Vicky says, I think it comes down to mindset and what they see and hear in the media. Anne-Marie says, protesting demonstrations does not automatically equal rioting. Rioting is used as a dirty word to cause fear, prevent peaceful activity. Monty says, when the rich lobby, it's for money. When the poor demonstrates, it's for social justice. Norma Ellis, podcaster Norma, says, it's just about the issue that the majority support. And Bangi says, if government and officials listen to the requirements of civilians, then there will be no tension and it avoids demonstrations and riots. Monty says, the people in power need to change for change to take place. Patrick T, I think children throwing petrol bombs in sign of social deprivation, a well-adjusted society would not have that. Sharon says, effective demonstration is different based on political regimes. Sometimes rioting is necessary to draw international attention, e.g. in Hong Kong. The Yellow Umbrella movement has a limited progress. We thank you for your comments and keep them pouring them in. Demonstration definitely makes a difference in the verdict of yesterday in America. Joanne, we thank you for that. And Patrick says, that's in reference to Northern Ireland, which Cath mentioned. We thank you for your comment. We are now going to go back to Councillor Sunny. And Councillor Sunny, question for you. Okay. If freedom comes with a high level of discipline and responsibility, how can we clearly define the boundaries of human rights versus the attitude of self-entitlement?
Thank you. There can never be rights without responsibilities. I think we will start from that starting point. But what is the responsibility, whether as an individual or as a government? Okay. The responsibility of an individual is to make sure maybe sometimes to vote, sometimes to be law-abiding, sometimes to love your neighbor, sometimes to serve in the military service and all these things. Well, of course, government also has the responsibility to protect you. But only where that responsibility falls higher or lower, that's where we have a problem. Now, for instance, government demands that we all loyal, but at the same time, our freedom is being gradually eroded. When policies are being made, we are not consulted, which often happens in most parts of developing world. As you saw, the example which we use, whether in China or whether in Nigeria last year during the SAR HENSA protest, now they want us to be good citizens, but at the same time, basic human right for protection is not there. You see every day that people get killed, people get maimed, even in some cases, people get raped. Now, where is their human right there? It's only when government wants to introduce new law. We used the example of the poll tax earlier. When it was introduced, that created riot. Also, the failure of government in 2011 led to the London riot all over London. So when we are being asked to be responsible citizens, we should be, but at the same time, those who are elected, like myself and others, then we also need to listen to those we represent. It's only when that respect, trust break down, you can see where it leads. It leads to demonstration, it leads to riots, it leads to public disorder. So therefore, I think it's a lesson for all of us, policymakers, those of us in positions of leadership, to every now and then to keep on stepping back, look back, and be accountable. So we all have to be accountable. We can't expect our citizens to just be law-abiding all the time. Yes, it is true. I'm not advocating anybody should take the law into their own hands, but whereby we as policymakers, law enforcement officers are not accountable, as we saw in America. But thank God that's been, been corrected through the verdict we had yesterday. But where we have situations like that, there'll be chaos, there'll be anarchy. So therefore, I think a lesson for all of us in government at any level, in any part of the world, if we truly want to serve our community, our citizens, when we expect them to be law-abiding, we also make sure anything that will create tension between the government and the citizens, we avoid it. And where that happens, in some cases, it may be unavoidable. Then we should have process of dialogue, and government should be listening, and government should be bold enough and mature enough to make take corrective actions if necessary to correct the wrong. Unfortunately, most of the time, governments do fail to do that. And then you then see what happens after it. You see riots, demonstration, destruction of property, even sometimes it leads to loss of human life. I think it's a lesson, it's a wake-up call for all of us. I won't blame any particular government, but it's a wake-up for all of us in government, in any part of the world, to be people-centered in our approach to governance.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sani Lambe, if you have just joined us, this is Councillor Sani Lambe, the Labour and Cooperative Councillor for Southwark South Bermondsey Ward, who was just addressing the show today. On the show today, we were also joined by Cath Convery, a former Armed Forces Major and an active member of Wantage and Didcot Conservative Association. And we also have the pleasure today of having the former Mayor, Councillor Sanchia Alasia, the Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion from London South Bank University.
For real-life stories broadcasted live on air, so please subscribe to our newsletter from our website. We will be honored if you could please like and follow our Facebook pages. Stay in touch and tune in by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Thank you for following us on our Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Tumblr, and TikTok. We are live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. GMT. Please do share with others.
Thank you and welcome back onto our screens. Cath, we have a question for you. And once again, we would like to thank you for your time on the show today. And the question is from TJ, and it reads, question for Cath. Are you saying that the riots and violence in Belfast back in the dark days didn't play a significant part in eventually bringing everybody to the table?
You're asking really difficult questions tonight. The Troubles and the end of the Troubles, and I would question whether the Troubles are really truly ended at the moment. Do I think that riots and violence brought people to the peace table? John Major started the peace dividend in 1994. The Good Friday Agreement was finally signed in 1998. And politicians on all sides worked very hard with the community to effect the change that was brought into place for the Good Friday Agreement. Unfortunately, things that have happened subsequently haven't necessarily followed what was agreed in the Good Friday Agreement. Northern Ireland is more complex than most people will give it credit for, and I think it is almost impossible to say what would have happened without people undertaking terrorist activities without and I've gone back into that spectrum again in making that statement. So because a terrorist activity is way above rioting, it's moving more into the warfare area that I was talking about earlier. And Mara, thank you so much. You've just brought up suffragettes, because one of the things I noted down earlier was exactly that. Would we have felt that, if we'd lived back in the time of Emily Pankhurst and the suffragette movement, would we have felt differently with regards to the way that petitioning actually helped support what was going on at the time? They went, the suffragettes went through huge amounts of personal deprivation in order to get the change that they felt that was necessary. But I don't believe personally that it's any one thing that affects any of these changes. And I still believe passionately that writing is such a negative thing, and it requires you to rebuild the community, rebuild trust between different parts of the community. And I think that takes a long time as well. And we've seen that in London City in the past, and we've had to work hard with regards to that. So I do think that this end of the spectrum, rioting, is not where we should be. Peaceful demonstration is so completely different from a riot, and I just cannot see it. I can't see an example of where it's been effective. Somebody mentioned Hong Kong earlier, and undoubtedly what's going on in Hong Kong is interesting, isn't it? They are trying to effect a change of the Chinese government. They are trying to stop the change that the Chinese government is trying to bring into Northern Ireland. I'm not sure that it's really going to affect the change they want. And that's a challenge. You take it to Russia, and there has been rioting in the streets in Russia over the last 3, 4, 5 years. Has it affected the change that the people in Russia wanted, those that were rioting wanted? I'd suggest not. They've been thrown into jail. They've been treated quite harshly. I still think that the end of the spectrum I'd like to stop at is peaceful protest. We have the right for peaceful protest. And all of the things that we were talking about earlier, you have the right to petition, you have the right to lobby. And I understand completely what somebody put in chat, that only the rich get to lobby. I do believe that everybody has the right to reach out to their parliamentary or council representative. That's why they were elected, and you only have 4 years in this country to find a new one if you don't like them, or 5, depending on the election process we're talking to. So I'm sorry, but I'm sitting quite clearly on the fence here, that I just don't think that rioting is the end of the spectrum I'd like to be in.
Thank you. And we appreciate your view and all the views that you've shared with us today. I'm certain that we are left thinking a little bit more than we were thinking before. We appreciate that. We are now going to go back to the former mayor, Councillor Sanchia. Councillor Sanchia, if freedom comes with a high level of discipline and responsibility, how can we clearly define the boundaries of human rights versus an attitude of self-entitlement? We're asking you this question.
Yeah, I mean that's a complex question. I think rights come with responsibilities, and that's why we do have the right under the Human Rights Act, as I mentioned before, under Article 11, to protest peacefully, to join a trade union, of which I'm a member of too, and to hold the powerful to account, and everyone has the right to associate with others and gather together for a common purpose. There isn't necessarily the right to intentionally violently protest, and that's why you will see public authorities step in when peaceful protests do get to those stages. But I think, as representatives, whether it's central government, whether it's local government, we will come across people whose views we disagree with. We're servants of the people, we're elected to serve, but obviously we're serving a diverse range of people. So we're not going to be able to please everybody all of the time, but we must be accountable for our actions, and we must be able to explain why we're taking the decisions that we as elected officials choose to take. There are limitations in our right to protest and to associate, because we've got to do everything within the law of the land, whether it's here in the UK or whatever country you're in. It's got to be proportionate, and we've got to give our notice, so we can't, for example, decide tomorrow we're going to take that demonstration. It has to be organized with the authorities, with the police services. But I think we've got these rights and these freedoms, and we have to use them responsibly. And as I mentioned before, there are different ways, through demonstrations, through petitions, through lobbying, and depending on the matter and the people that we're associating with, we will decide responsibly together which one is most effective. But I would encourage people to get involved. Politics affects every area of our lives, whether it's housing, whether it's education, crime and safety, or whether it's environmental issues. So I would encourage you to get involved. The last demonstration that I went on, I haven't been on one since the lockdown, but the last one that I went on was actually a peaceful march about endometriosis. And those of you that know me will know that I suffer from endometriosis, and every year in the spring summertime we have a peaceful protest in the centre of London, a peaceful demonstration arguing for change, arguing for more research, more awareness and more support for those of us that suffer from endometriosis. And I greatly enjoyed meeting and associating and walking through the streets of London in 2019, it would have been. And obviously we weren't able to do it in the same way last year or this year. But I think there is something very powerful in coming together with a common aim and making your voice heard, and making sure that the issues that are hidden, where endometriosis was hidden for a long time, come out into the light, and that the authorities take the appropriate seriousness to the concerns that we as the citizens will have on various issues.
Thank you, Councillor Sanchia. Councillor Sanchia, what was your last word to our viewers today?
Okay, well, thank you for your questions. Your questions have really been quite complex, but it just goes to show the complexity of the issue. But it also goes to show the interest that people have in civic society, and I'm all for people getting involved. It doesn't necessarily have to be as an elected representative. You know, get involved in just your local community. There will be various community, faith and voluntary organisations. Get involved in your local community. Get to know who your elected representatives are, what they stand for, what you're allowed to lobby and to write to them on, whether it's central or local government, and just get engaged, because this is our society and we all need to work together to make it the society that we want to see it become, not just for us but for the generations that follow us. So thank you, it's been a pleasure.
We would like to thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing such wisdom with us, your opinions and your suggestions. We thank you for that. And we are now going to go back to Councillor Sunny. Councillor Sunny, what in a nutshell, in 60 seconds, would you like to share with our audience?
Wow. You know, freedom, rights come with responsibility. But what is key, the key principle to all that, fairness, equality, and justice. And they all have all these things in common: fighting for justice, fighting against injustice, fighting oppression, fighting abuse of power, seeking respect, seeking human rights, seeking peace, seeking tranquility. I think we all can learn something from that. It's only when those key principles break down and leaders fail to listen, we can see the end result: anarchy, destruction of property. That is why we all need to learn from each other and learn from each other and listen to each other. I believe through continued dialogue, even some of the issues we think are complex can be resolved peacefully. Thank you.
Councillor Sunny, we thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience. Thank you.
Okay.
We would like to go to Cath, and Cath, what would you like to share with our viewers today? Your closing statement for today, please.
So I agree with everything that's just about getting involved. This is about being passionate, but this is about staying within the law. There is a fabulous song that was written and played many, many times in the 60s, and we don't really know very much about it in the UK, but it's called I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. And for me, it says everything that I believe passionately in. Get involved. If you want to affect a change, you can affect change, but you don't need to do that by rioting. You can do that by peaceful protest, by lobbying, by making that change in your community, and affecting and making sure that the community reflects the change that you wish it to be. The change is as much within us as it is within our nation. I think that we live in an amazing country, and I know that we can work together to affect a change that means it's even more strong and powerful as we come out of this awful pandemic that we've been in for the last year. It's about staying within the rules. It's about knowing your rights. It's about passion of what you believe in. And yeah, go look up I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. It's a fabulous song. Go and be passionate about what you believe in.
Cath, would like to thank you for your participation in this program today. Thank you for taking some of those difficult and uncomfortable questions, and thank you for participating. We thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a quotation by Amit Abraham, and it reads, "To be heard today, you need to be loud, since silence is now imitation gold." To be heard today, you need to be loud, since silence is now imitation gold. There's another quotation by Jeffrey, and it reads, "If you want to be heard, learn the language of your listeners." If you want to be heard, learn the language of your listeners. If you want to be heard, learn the language of your listeners. We thank you so much for joining us this evening. There's so many other comments, and we will read a couple of the other comments that have come through. We apologize that because of time, we will not be able to take them back to our panelists, but we will read them out. Joanne says, my first demonstration was for the EdSARS in London. I had to because I felt the pain as a mother. Just killing innocent souls that wanted a better future for their generation and generations to come. Vicky says, be the change you wish to see. And Tanya says, Lady Waynette, you're amazing, phenomenal woman, and your show inspires us, and we are learning each week. Thank you so very much. We appreciate you. Thank you for your comment. Anne-Marie says, well done for daring to host this debate. A difficult subject such as this challenges our social morals. And thank you for joining us, and thank you for all the input. And Ade Peju says, great topic, and thank you to all the speakers, which reminds me, we have a message that came through. Michelle from My CSR, that's mycsr.org, we will put this in the comment box below, says, I'm the CEO and the founder of a functionality framework. We have a steering group for the 30th of April, 2021, and she wanted this read out. And she said we should put her information into our comment boxes because the info at mycsr.org have jobs for under 25s. They are running an employment program. We thank Michelle for her message that she sent through. Thank you for all your messages that we've had today. Thank you for your time. And we will be putting the email addresses and the social media handles for all our guests that we have had today. Once again, I would like to thank our Extraordinary Achievers team, our technical team, and our admin team who assist me so greatly. We are live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can always go onto our website and you'll be able to see what is coming up next. And Amara says, great discussions throughout. Thank you, everyone. And Mara, I'd like to say thank you so very much for assisting with this program today. And Joanne says, thanks for this amazing show. Simply the best. And you're simply the best too. We thank you so, so very much. Melissa says, thank you for taking this amazing topic. We thank you so very much. And please do follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, Instagram, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel and do follow us on Extraordinary Achievers page or on my page, Waynette Peters. We thank you. We are going to take a moment to listen to this song, Never Around by Anthony Everest.
You're never around when I need you. You always have something wrong, something to say about you. How can we be friends? How can we be enemies?
Thank you for watching, and see you next week at 8 p.m. every Wednesday. Please do tune in, and thank you for supporting us. Good night for today.
Thank you for watching. You can now follow us on Facebook and subscribe our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, share, and comment.